Hi, Jason.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. You are Jason Rezaian, and you are in Iran, which is kind of unusual in the sense that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of reporting coming out of Iran, and there certainly aren't many people in Iran who are American citizens reporting on a regular basis, and you are an American citizen. You are also an Iranian citizen. And so I thought you might have kind of a valuable perspective on things Iranian, certainly including this nuclear issue.
I like to think so. I hope your audience agrees.
I'm optimistic. And you are now, I gather, in a travel agency. Is that right?
I am.
At the moment?
I'm sitting in a friend's travel agency, one, because the lighting is a little bit better in my home, two, because I feel like the phone line here might be a little more secure than the one in my house. So they were gracious enough to offer me one of their small offices, and I feel more comfortable here.
So the chances that an Iranian official is listening to this are lower than they would be if you hadn't.
Probably. I mean, we don't have any playbook to go by. It's just gut feelings, and it's the slightest measure of caution that I can take, and I feel more free having a conversation here than I would at home.
Okay. And we'll just hope that they're not big fans of Blogging Heads TV.
They might be. Who knows? And if they are, they might even like what I have to say.
They might learn something.
Yeah.
So listen. From where I sit, things look kind of confusing. I mean, you have this sense of conflicting signals coming from Iran. So a few days ago, Iran announced that they were interested in resuming negotiations, and that's good. At the same time, they only a couple of days later told the IAEA inspectors that they could in fact not inspect a military facility that the inspectors, I think, had been led to believe they were going to be able to inspect. And meanwhile, of course, not long ago, there were these terrorist attacks in abroad that were attributed by some to Iran. So it seems like kind of a jumble, and in America, there's just no clear sense of how this thing is going to play out. And I'm wondering if things look any clearer or at least different from where you sit.
Well, I definitely don't think they look any clearer. I mean, I think everybody is confused and on eggshells right now. And we also have the added bonus of living under these mounting sanctions that keep making transactions with the rest of the world more difficult. Price of goods are going up. The value of Iranian's currency is sinking by the day. So I think that there's a great sense among Iranian people that they would love for this situation to be resolved and get on with their lives and get on with their country being a productive part of the world community.
And how much are the sanctions biting? I mean, is it the case that pretty much every Iranian is at a minimum inconvenienced by them and possibly worse? I mean,
yeah, I think the cost of living in local currency has gone up by at least 30% since 1st January. So that's a huge.
Wow, that's getting to be major inflation, and inflation is one of those things that once it gets started, you can't always stop. Right?
Kind of hard to control, and we see it every day. I mean, the price of goods and services keeps going up, and it doesn't really show any signs of slowing down. The currency after January 1st, when Obama signed in this new legislation that conceivably could cut off Iran's central bank from the rest of the world, the currency lost about 75% of its value. It's come back a bit over the last few weeks, but nobody is on firm ground. Businesses that rely on contracts with foreign countries or foreign companies are having a tough time paying. Tankers aren't delivering the goods that they're bringing into Iran. Iran has said that they're going to cut off the sale of oil to France and England. So, to answer the original question, I don't think that there's a lot of clarity here, but I think that there is one thing that that maybe people don't see in the West as much. It's this idea of carrots and sticks that we hear about so much. As far as the Iranians concerned, as far as the Iranian authorities are concerned, it's all sticks. I mean, they're really not seeing much in terms of tangible bonuses to giving up enrichment, other than we won't attack you, and that doesn't seem like a huge incentive for the authorities here. At the same time, it's also a very proud country, proud leadership. They've been working and spending to develop this program for years and years, which they still claim is not for the purposes of weaponizing. So, they've made a very clear point to their public that they're not going to give up. So, at some point...
The government has made that.
Yeah, and it plays really well with a lot of people here. They look at it and say, okay, look, we don't necessarily want our government to have weapons, but if everybody else can have a nuclear program, why can't we? And this idea that Iran is irrational regime. I think you hit on that a bit in your piece to chat on the Atlantic blog a couple of days ago. This country hasn't really attacked anybody in over 200 years that I'm aware of. There's definitely a lot of harsh rhetoric coming out of Tehran. I totally understand that. I don't want to put that aside at all. But at the same time... And
there is separately the view in the West that it has sponsored or encouraged attacks by Hezbollah or whoever.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely been part of their past. It doesn't seem to have been part of their MO for the last 15 or 20 years. These attacks in Thailand and India and Georgia this week, they seem really strange from the point of view of an Iranian looking at this. I mean, especially Thailand. I mean, Iran has really good relations with Thailand, does a lot of business with Thailand, has come out very strongly over the last couple of years saying we want to improve and expand our ties with Thailand, and they've been doing so. So it seems like shooting themselves in the foot.
So the Iranian people, when they hear these reports, they are not thinking, yes, our government's behind that, and it serves the Israelis right for assassinating our scientists. The thinking on the street is that Iran is not behind these things.
I think that there's more than one mind on this, and I've talked to people that have said, why wouldn't they do this? This is a very mean-spirited, despicable regime. They've killed a lot of people. Why wouldn't they be behind something like this? And then on the flip side, there's people that are a bit more maybe realistic about it or pragmatic about it, and saying, what does Iran gain from this? So yeah, it's. I think it's. I wouldn't say it's split down the middle, but I think the people err towards suspicion on this one that the government might not be behind it.
And then on this larger question you're kind of getting at, do the sanctions put pressure on the Iranian government from the people to get this thing solved and to do what's necessary to get the sanctions taken off? Or, on the other hand, is it more of a rally around the flag effect? This is an external threat. We have to support our leadership. I suspect there's a little of both going on, but am I right in thinking that so far the dominant effect is the rally around the flag effect or not?
I think the dominant effect has been to make people feel more isolated than they've been at any point since the war with Iraq. The war between Iran and Iraq was going on in the 80s. I think it reinforces their feeling that they're kind of a friendless nation, which really hurts their sense of nationalistic pride. I think the rallying around the flag effect is not something that we're seeing. The head of the parliament, the speaker of the parliament, day before yesterday, came out and said we need to address the rising costs of goods and services. Where did this come from? How did this happen? And this is something that's been going on for several months. And the reaction from most people when they hear this guy say this is, "Hey, buddy, what planet are you living on?" There's no real love affair going on with the current parliament, with Ahmadinejad, with the leadership overall. I mean, people are pretty upset about it. But I don't think that they're upset in the way that they were in 2009. I don't see any signs of people, wanting to protest publicly. My sense has been that if there's going to be a renewal in any sort of street-level protests in Iran, it'll be, bread riots. It's not going to be about political reform.
Not going to be the Greens we're going to see on the street anytime soon.
No.
So now earlier you mentioned the question on a lot of people's minds, like wait, we give up enrichment and what do we get? Now, what the United Nations has asked for is a suspension of Iranian enrichment, and the idea being that then negotiations would take place, and then in principle there could be carrots at the end, including the resumption of Iranian enrichment, so long as the international community could be assured that the enrichment was for peaceful purposes only. Is that part not kind of getting through to the public? In other words, the idea that in principle, the negotiation could lead to anything, and that what's being asked for is a suspension, not a permanent end to Iranian enrichment. Do you think that part is getting through to the people on the street?
Honestly, I don't think that part's getting through to the people on the street. I think most people are. If the reverse situation were happening in the U.S., do you think that the majority of people would take the time to read the reports and the potential rules of negotiation? I kind of doubt it. I think the message that's getting to them is much more simple, which is the West, led by America and Israel, is trying to get in the way of our inalienable right to nuclear energy, which we deserve just like everybody else. I mean, that's the message.
And most people, the last public opinion polling I saw from Iran, which was a couple of years ago, suggested that almost everyone was pretty insistent on the right of Iran to have its own nuclear energy program. Most people were not at that point in favor of Iran developing nuclear weapons. Is that your readings right now?
Yeah, I think that's still the case. But to be honest, Bob, Iranians are very nationalistic people. And I think that's what happens when you have an intact history that goes back millennia. And when you push and prod people on this question, the most common answer is, no, I don't think we should be going for nuclear weapons. But if this country can have it, if America can have it, Israel can have it, if Pakistan can have it, why can't we have it? I mean, I think that's the attitude of a lot of Iranians on that question. But that being said, this is not a daily concern for most people. I mean, most people are trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to, take advantage of the education that I have, get a job, create a better life for myself than the ones my parents left behind for me, and cultivate a good life for generations to come. I mean, I think that's what is on most people's mind.
Okay. And how responsive are the key political players to to the sentiment, whatever the public sentiment is at a given moment. And I mean, the two players I'm thinking of are the Supreme Leader on the one hand and President Ahmadinejad on the other. And actually, maybe before you answer that question, you could say a little about, the division of power between them. I mean, the Supreme Leader is, as the name implies, the Supreme Leader, and yet the presidency is certainly not a merely ceremonial office, right?
No.
And lately there has been a certain amount of tension between these two players, I gather. So can you say anything that will help clarify for Americans kind of like what's the deal, who gets to call what shots?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most simple way of looking at it is like imagine an American system with the executive branch, the legislative, and the judiciary, with the Pope getting to decide on any ties. The tie goes to the Pope, basically. That's kind of the way it works here.
So the Supreme Leader only intervenes in a formal way when there is a kind of a stalemate among the other players.
Yeah, I mean that's basically been the way that the position was set up. I mean, and I think more and more he's chimed in than he did in his first. It's about 23 years now that he's held this position. I think he's been chiming in more recently than he had before, and I think that that's a reaction to Ahmadinejad's interpretation of the executive branch, which is very similar as it would be in other countries. But I think that the previous president, the reformist Khatami, respected the rule of clerics much more. He was a cleric himself, but was more in tune with this idea than Ahmadinejad is. And I always try and tell people that it's not right to call Ahmadinejad a conservative in terms of this system, because he and his group constitute probably the biggest departure from the original Ayatollah Khomeini vision of Islamic republicanism that has existed in these 33 years. There's really no other way to put it. I mean, these guys are very much against the idea of the clergy ruling the country. That said, I'm not trying to. I'm not endorsing them in any way. I'm just pointing out the fact that they're against clerical rule, which doesn't mean that they're against Islamic rule. I mean, but they're definitely trying to diminish the powers of the clergy.
And it doesn't mean to say that they are not the conservatives in this battle in that sense. It doesn't mean that they are the liberal reformers either, does it? I mean, I guess maybe my confusion is between, on the one hand, you can think of Ahmadinejad as just trying to amass more power for himself while he's in the office, and that might include, cultivating a base within the Republican Guard. Is that the official term for that
Revolutionary Guard,
yeah. And then that's a separate matter from him saying, well, I want to cultivate going forward, a more democratic foundation for this country, strengthen the presidency, and, liberalize voting, respect for the outcome of it, whatever. Those are kind of two very different things. I think in the West, this tends to be depicted as fundamentally a power struggle between the two people.
I don't think it's necessarily a power struggle between the two people. What I think it is, from my reading, is that it's a struggle over what the next generation of the Islamic Republic is going to look like. And I, for one, I'm of the opinion. I mean, I live here. I see what goes on every day. I don't think that in name this system is going anywhere. I mean, I think this is going to be around for a long time in some form or another. But I think that it was reforming in a lot of ways and continues to progress and evolve even since 2009. And I think this is more a struggle about what direction these two guys or these two camps want the next generation to look like.
But I guess maybe what I'm saying is neither of these camps really includes the Greens, right? Or am I wrong? The people we think of as the kind of
the opposition
Western-oriented reformers.
Not at all. Not at all. There's no, as far as these factions are concerned, there's no place for the Greens whatsoever.
And you think the Greens will continue to be marginalized for some time?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that what we've seen over the last almost 2 years now is that they haven't been able to mount any large-scale anything publicly in this country, which means several things. I mean, they've been diffused. A lot of their leaders have been arrested or have left the country, or people are just very much afraid to take part in those sorts of activities because they feel that their life is more valuable than what they were fighting for in 2009. I mean, I think the what I've seen and heard from people after the Arab Spring and everything that's happened over the last year is a lot of jealousy about what took place there and the inability for Iranians to go the next step. And I think a big part of that is that the reality is, and again, I'm not endorsing anything, but the standard of living here is a lot higher than it is in some of those countries.
Mm-hmm. So there isn't that source of revolt.
No.
Sheer material deprivation as a motivator of
not at all. Not at all.
Rebellion.
People's educations are taken care of, basic health care, some food. I mean, it's the Cuba argument, right? But, in some ways it works. I mean, you keep people fed and housed. The likelihood of them fighting to the death is less.
Mm-hmm. And does that mean that actually the Greens never represented a majority of the Iranian people?
I think it's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. I mean, I was here during the election and the aftermath, and there was a lot of people that were very fired up and ready to go the distance at that time. But it died out rather quickly. I think another part of the problem is that the official, I don't know if we can call them the official leaders of the Green Movement, but, Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karabi, they're founding fathers of this system. And neither one of them ever came out and said, we're opposed to this system. We just want a fair vote. That's what they were talking about. And I think that was a very different thing than what a lot of people were talking about at the time.
And were Ahmadinejad and Khamenei on the same page as far as the repression of the Greens? I mean, was that neither one of them wanted to give the Greens any airspace, right?
No. I mean, at that time it was, there was no open fissure between the two camps.
So that they agree on. They are against liberal reform. I mean, I guess a question I'm asking is, what would be the difference in the way the future of Iran looks, if Ahmadinejad prevails in this struggle and has his way, as opposed to if Khamenei prevails?
Well, I think that there's more. I think.
And kind of relatedly, Jason, I mean, whose side are you on, right? I mean, if you accept the premise that the Greens aren't going anywhere anytime soon, is there one of these two visions that is more congenial to you, and also do you feel like saying it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to pin my bet on any of these horses right now. That's it's not a great set of choices, but I would say that the Ahmadinejad camp seems to be more interested in connecting with the rest of the world, both diplomatically and economically.
So does that mean that the chances of a a kind of more or less happy ending to this nuclear standoff. In other words, if you imagine a situation in which, say, the diplomatic resolution is that Iran gets to enrich uranium, but there are these intrusive inspections, and so they don't build a weapon, everybody's happy. That kind of outcome is actually more likely to happen to the extent that Ahmadinejad gets his way and not the supreme leader?
I think it's fair to say that, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, I think that writing has been on the wall for a while,
because I think that's not the perception in the West.
Not at all.
But because so much emphasis has been put on a few things Ahmadinejad has said, like wipe the Zionist regime off the map or whatever exactly. I mean, that's a disputed translation. Whatever he said, The reply has been, well, don't worry, he's not really the supreme leader. There's this other guy who's not as crazy.
Right.
But what you're saying is that actually Ahmadinejad is more pro-engagement than the supreme leader and more likely to steer Iran to a happy ending.
I think that, look, I can't speak for what's on either one of these guys' minds, but I can, go by what they've said publicly and how they've acted publicly, and that seems to be the case. I mean, I think that the supreme leader, by definition, is much more aligned with the ideology of this system that he helped create than a guy who's a generation younger than him and represents something very different in the society, which is the poor, working class people. Young, proactive, and more worldly, which is those are the two opposing forces, I think, and it's really hard to say which one of these camps has more of a hold in the society. I mean, I think that what's happening is that there's forces that are maybe outside of the control of Iran itself. And that those that are less aligned with the history, pedigree, and ideology of the system might be better equipped to deal with the 21st century than the others.
And if you wound up with that ending that I kind of outlined, where the nuclear program resumes ultimately, complete with enrichment, but there are these inspections, and Iran is granted the right to enrich under those conditions. And maybe, in addition, there's some formal rapprochement with the United States. Maybe, guarantee that the United States would not attack if not provoked or whatever. If you get that kind of outcome, is that a political winner in Iran? I mean, let's say Ahmadinejad gets the credit for that. Does that enhance his political stature?
Look, I think
his popularity.
I think that the one thing that I think I could speak to in terms of the majority of Iranians, I think the majority of Iranians would like to see Iran have a stable and connected relationship with all countries in the world as much as they can. There's a very business-minded society. There's a lot of goods and materials and resources that they would like to sell to the rest of the world, and this current situation has made that much more difficult, if not impossible. They look to their neighbors in Turkey and the UAE and say, what do these people have that we don't have? And what's happened over the last several decades that we've been, our standing has been diminished and theirs has elevated. And I think that they just like to see their standing elevated. And, I think that there are people in this country that believe that a nuclear bomb would elevate that position. But I think that those people are fewer in number than those that believe that by having renewed relations with the West, especially in terms of trade, that their position could elevate that way much more easily.
Mm-hmm. And are Ahmadinejad on the one hand and the Supreme Leader on the other both pretty responsive to to popular opinion? I mean, Ahmadinejad is the one who holds an actual elected office, although he's not eligible to run another time in 2013, but he is a popularly elected official. Would you say that both of them are responsive to perceived public opinion, or one more than the other?
Yeah, no, I think that they're both responsive to the public opinion of their own supporters. And I think in both cases, the number of people that support these two individuals and the kind of unofficial parties or factions that they represent is in the millions in both cases. So they are responsive. But I think if you read, Ahmadinejad's not proclamations, but his stances on things like the hijab, the Islamic dress code. Although he's a very conservative, socially conservative person, and his wife and daughters are very, very much covered, his opinion is that this isn't something that we should be policing. This is a matter of choice of people, and I think he's not saying that because he wants to see women's hair flowing in the street. I think it's because he realizes that that's an opinion that will potentially win him support. But in terms of veering from the Islamic line, that's not something that you're going to see from the supreme religious leader.
So is it the case that with the Greens marginalized, he's kind of happy to pick up the Green vote, so to speak?
Right. Definitely.
And that's maybe, from our point of view, a good thing, that he would be drawn in that direction. I
think it's something to look into. And I look, my opinion of Ahmadinejad and how he's perceived outside of the country is that we should take a closer look and not rush to such quick judgment. Obviously, he said many despicable things. We also have to understand that there are domestic political politics at play and regional politics at play. Those things that he says about the Holocaust don't necessarily play very well in Iran, but they play extremely well in places like Jakarta and the West Bank and Cairo and Riyadh. And
in some cases, that is his intended audience.
Well, I think less and less so. And I think he's been saying that sort of stuff less and less. But, in his first term especially, I had this opinion very early on that he was trying to kind of create this pan-Islamic persona for himself, which is extremely dangerous as far as Sunni leaders are concerned. Because here's this Shia guy that is saying things that their populations that are mostly Sunni are relating to more than what their own leaders were saying. So it's just kind of natural, and I think he's a very wily and clever politician, and I think he's shown that over the last 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a view or want to express one on this contested question of what when he said the famous thing that was translated as wipe Israel off the map? I mean, there's two questions. One is about that translation.
Yeah.
And the other is whether he was talking about the people in Israel or Zionism as a form of government.
I think probably the latter. But just by stating that opinion, automatically I'm going to become an apologist of this regime. I'm not a translator. But I do know that what he said was a quote from Ayatollah Khomeini. It wasn't his own words, and I know that this is a very poetic people and a poetic language, and I think what he was saying was intended to be more metaphoric rather than an existential threat to Israel. And I think that the leaders of Israel have used that. They've gotten more mileage out of that quote than they ever could have anticipated. They continue to get it, and I think it's unfortunate.
And it is a fact that demonization of Israel and America have been just mainstays of of support for the government, right? I mean, I don't know to what extent the appetite for that has been sustained and maybe even intensified by the government's satiating it, but for whatever reason, I mean, these are America bad, Israel bad are really important parts of Iran's political psychology, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're important parts of the ideology of the Islamic Republic. I mean, if you get rid of your anti-Americanism and your anti-Zionism, you're taking away a couple of the essential pillars of what you built. Mm-hmm. On the flip side of that, though, I think the United States and Israel have been just as inflammatory in how they've talked about Iran, and actually taken much more egregious action than Iran is even capable of doing. To be frank,
you mean like the assassination of the scientists and other sabotage?
Yeah, and sanctions, and I understand that Iran has said some horrible things, and I don't condone that at all. And they've done, as all governments have over the years, have played their fair of dirty tricks and the like. But I think right now, if you look at the situation, Iran doesn't really have the upper hand. And I don't really think that it's a state or country to be afraid of in the way that it's being portrayed right now.
Do you think a decision has been made by the government about whether to produce a nuclear weapon?
I personally, honest to God, I don't think that they're trying to make a nuclear weapon. I don't see why they would want one. I think that they're probably going for that breakout level that everybody talks about.
Where they would have the capacity to build one within a month, 2 months, 3 months, if they decided, but they would not take that step unless there was some compelling reason.
Exactly. And I don't see a compelling reason right now.
Mm-hmm. But then what are we to think when they say suddenly, no, the inspectors can't go to this military base when apparently the inspectors had been led to believe they could? Or, I mean, is that kind of thing a power struggle within the government? Or
it's hard to say. I think it's very hard to say what exactly that is. And I think some of it's theater and a very different style of engagement and negotiation that we're used to in the West. And I think part of it is showing that, hey, we don't have to just bend just because you say so. I think that's a big part of it.
Okay. So for now, I mean, in principle, it sounds like there could be a resolution to the issue if the things you say are true. I mean, the people would like normalization of relations with the outside world, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Ahmadinejad would like to be able to take credit for that, and is himself pro-engagement, at least relatively speaking. And it's true, he is the guy who's always coming to New York.
He loves it. I mean, he loves New York, and the interviews that he gives paint a very different picture than the ones pictures that are painted by the statements that he makes. The one thing I want to say, Bob, is I think that all factions of the Iranian system are pro-engagement at this point, and it's kind of a game of capture the flag almost. I mean, everybody wants to be the last man standing. It's like Wrestlemania. How about that?
Elaborate on that metaphor.
Well, everybody wants to...
For those of us who are not ardent WrestleMania fans.
Everybody wants to be able to take credit for saving the day. And I think more and more people understand that saving the day means getting out from under these sanctions, creating clearer path to business with the rest of the world, which I think is a really essential part of this that we forget about all the time, and diminish the threat that Iran is currently under. I don't think anybody sees this as a desirable situation right now.
But then I guess the question is, why aren't there more signs that we're moving toward resolution? Do you think there's a genuine communication problem, with the West making clear what things are possible?
I think
this works out, or what?
Yeah. I think that there's probably a huge communication problem. I think more than that, there's a long-standing lack of trust that goes back to 1953 and the CIA overthrowing Iran's Prime Minister Mossadegh, and then the hostage crisis in 1979 to 1981. I mean, there's not a good base for communication. Throughout the entire Cold War, we had embassies in Moscow. They had embassies in Washington. There was communications going back and forth. There was meetings. There hadn't been those kinds of meetings for 33 years, and I really don't know why we should expect the situation to be any more fruitful than it is right now, when we're really just starting to butt up against each other face to face for the first time in all these years.
Mm-hmm. And there was a Wall Street Journal piece by Richard Haass, head of the Council on Foreign Relations, and a co-author recently that said the West should put together a package, a deal, including the carrots, and make it public rather than take it to the negotiating table. Convey it to the Iranian people.
Yeah.
And the leadership, for that matter. But thereby, I guess they thought put pressure on the leadership to deliver something. Do you think that would be an advance?
I think that would be a big advance, but I think we have too many, for lack of a better word, meatheads in Congress to let that happen. I really don't see that a situation like that will unfold with the current anti-Iranianism that's... So
you think the domestic political pressure in America would not permit this proposal by Richard Haass to actually take material?
I don't think it would happen before November. I haven't been in the States in a few months, but the sense that I get is it's not a very hospitable climate to talking about engagement.
Just walking down the street in America, I don't see a lot of people waving Iranian flags, I've got to say.
Really?
That's not. I think you correctly picked up on the vibe in America right now. Not tremendously pro-Iranian.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just kind of in closing. Well, maybe two questions. But one is, when I travel abroad, and people go, "Why did your president do this?"
Yeah.
I find it's usually just something they don't understand about American politics, and I can say, oh, that was because he was afraid if he didn't, the Republicans would say this. Or that was because his base was upset with him and he had to appease them and do that. Is there, I assume there are those kinds of things with Iranian politicians.
Every day.
And I'm just wondering, does anything come to mind of the kind of, as an example of the kind of thing that Americans don't understand about what domestic forces Iranian leaders are responding to?
I think that there's lots of them all the time. I mean, a good one I think was the situation with the hikers. If you remember, these three Americans that were detained over here. Ahmadinejad obviously understood that this was a huge public relations hit for him, and before the two men were released. It was almost a year and a half ago, I think, that he was going to go and speak at the UN again. I mean, he was really pushing to get these guys released before his departure to New York, and basically announced that they're going to be released. Now, I mean, Obama can't say that, tomorrow I'm going to release some guy that's on death row. It just doesn't happen like that, right? So the judiciary came out and said, sorry, sir, this is not your call. And put the kibosh on letting the hikers go, and I think that the way that was looked at in America was, wow, that's really mean to dangle that you're going to free these people and then you don't. Wasn't under his control. Never was under his control. And I think this is an important part of our lack of understanding of Iran is, although there is a supreme religious leader, this is not an autocratic system, and never really has been. There's a lot of repression, there's a lot of problems, but there's also a lot of debate and a lot of factions, and all of the positives and negatives that come out of that in any society. And I think that there's actually a lot of parallels between what's going on in Iran and American domestic politics right now.
In the sense that Obama is just constrained in a million ways from doing what he would like to do.
I think that if Obama and Ahmadinejad had their druthers, they would be sitting having a tea and I don't know where, maybe Brasilia or Istanbul, and talking these things over face to face. And I just don't think that on either side that's going to ever be allowed to happen.
And what is the main? I know it's preventing it in the case of Obama's domestic situation. I mean, various things. But what is it? How would you characterize what's preventing that from happening in Iran?
Well, I mean, my personal opinion is that everybody sees this resumptions of relations with the U.S. as a holy grail, and one that they don't want anybody else to have a piece of.
So there are too many. You mean there are too many other political players who don't want Ahmadinejad to get the credit for the breakthrough? Yeah,
that's what I see, and I think the same thing could have been said during Khatami's administration, from 1997 to 2005, and unfortunately, it's looking to me as though the same thing will be said about whoever the next president of Iran is.
So in that sense, I'm not leaving this conversation very hopeful. I mean, is there a hopeful scenario where the domestic politics in Iran permit Ahmadinejad to do what you say he would actually like to do, which is solve this problem?
I think that what would have to happen is the general stock of people to be lifted in a way that I don't see happening right now in terms of their economic well-being and their ability to travel freely and to enjoy the kind of lives that people in many other countries do. I don't see that happening while Iran is under such constraints and sanctions. I think that. Go ahead.
So you're not just saying that would have to be one of the carrots, right? I mean, you're not just saying that would have to be the promise of what could result from a negotiated solution. You're saying that's a prerequisite for. I guess I don't totally understand how that is a prerequisite for.
I just don't think that anybody within this system would be able to push themselves forward enough and kind of grab the national attention in any meaningful way, unless they're able to take Iran from under the rock of sanctions and take them to a better place than where they started several months ago.
Okay, but are you talking about elites and leaders traveling abroad, or something?
No, I'm talking more about the Iranian people's general sense of connectedness with the rest of the world. I mean, right now, an Iranian passport is worthless almost, right? Mm-hmm. This is a nation that for hundreds of years has considered itself part of the center of the world, a crossroads to east and west, and that's not the case anymore. I mean, the national self-respect has tanked in recent months, and somebody needs to come and capture that and elevate it. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
In principle, could something be accomplished by the thing we were just discussing? I mean, if the West, suppose politics in America permitted the West to put on the table a package that included all of this stuff, full engagement with the world, not just the end of sanctions, but guarantees about not attacking Iran and so on. Kind of a guarantee of integration with the world. Would that address the problem you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it would start to, but unfortunately, I just think we're so far away from that. It's hard for me even to imagine what that would look like.
But anyway, that's not the perception on the street right now. That all of this can be ours. That anything is possible if we can solve this nuclear problem. That's not the way it's perceived, I gather. Right?
No.
It's they don't think there are that many carrots out there.
No, they don't feel that there are that many carrots out there, and I think that unfortunately they've backed themselves into a corner where they can't gracefully give up too much of their program, and the U.S. has backed itself into a corner where it doesn't have that many options left, besides the one that none of us here really want to think about.
Okay, well, that is not a very hopeful ending of the conversation, I have to say. Although there have been a lot of little hopeful elements. What I mean is, there are more little sources for hope, I think, than Americans appreciate in terms of what some of, Ahmadinejad in particular would like to accomplish, and what the Iranian people would like to see happen.
Yeah,
definitely. And it's clear to me than ever that there are things many in the West, would be willing to do to solve this that the Iranian people are not aware of. And in that sense, you could say that what we have here is a failure to communicate. That's better than saying even if there were robust communication, there would be no hope, at least. If, as you say, the prospects for communicating it are constrained by political circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that you just encapsulated what's been the entire problem for these last 30-so years. I mean, it's always been a lack of communication, and I think it's what's gotten us to where we are right now. And opening up that communication is really the only thing that can conceivably put an end to all of this. But when you have the Congress passing legislation that makes it almost impossible for any American official to speak to a counterpart, an Iranian counterpart, I mean, I just, I don't see how we're to hope that the situation could improve, unless some people were willing to go it themselves. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening right now.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks so much for taking the time and taking the trouble to go find a place where you could find a telephone that you thought you could use to speak with candor. And I hope, down the road, maybe you'll have time to do this again if you're going to be there a while.
It'd be great. I appreciate the opportunity, Bob.
Okay. Take care, Jason.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.